It's 1 o'clock. I had a dream where I'm not sure what the heck happened, but it was very vivid. I walked, or I don't know, it started with something, I don't know, something happening, and then me ending up in the distant future where at first there wasn't much going on. There was this big building, like a residence, and then suddenly things began to like shift and change, and the people were freaking out about some sort of echo, and then something else happened, and there were gel cars at one point, and I don't think they were supposed to be the case. And then I woke up after still walking and stuff. It was really weird, but I don't know what to make of it, or how that has anything to do with what I was doing earlier today. It seems to parallel a parallel dimension in my story where something occurs in which something arrives that isn't everything. So I think it's a good time to bring that up. This is no longer what we're going to do, because it's too simplistic and would only result in us doing a computer of some kind with the stuff, like a very simple computer. But that's not what I wanted to open. What we're going to do instead is something a little different. We seem to have arrived at a parallel path to a different one that I've traveled through before. So I'm going to kind of be lazy. We're going to go to one of my blogs, and we are going to view the blog. We are going to check something. At the very end. Oh no, it's not there. It's right here. Okay, I'm going to read this page. It's kind of long. And I'll be back. I'm going to bring magic back into this. And we are going to use what's on this blog post as a source of it, because I haven't actually done a return to previous works yet. I would read you the entire thing, but it's hard to read, and you wouldn't get the references. At some other point I'll share the actual blog, unless you look for it up yourself, but yeah. Okay, so I took the faith idea, and I didn't do this after all, but I listed the number of things that we've been using throughout the week, or a couple days, and then I drew symbols next to them, but that's not important. What I did was apply the setup, and I ended up with a shape with weight, an action, sound, and then the most important part is that I use sigils, which are a concept in magic, and used the goal of improvement, or the ruler, and invented these. And what these are essentially shapes with guaranteed rotation based off of how their weights are positioned. So like this one would land differently from this one, and it would travel through the air differently, and you could also make them more aerodynamic or less aerodynamic, and depending on how they're made, they have a different sort of travel. These aren't actually these. I just realized that this is a separate concept that I thought of, but we'll do both. These could be useful for something like actual magic, but they need a little bit more work, so we'll work on that on this, but I will now explain this. So like you draw a symbol, because it's inverse, so rather than having the symbol mean anything, the symbol starts out with no meaning, and then you add a meaning. So in this case it would be something like a plant and a sickle, which isn't even spelled properly. So I guess this means cutting plants. And you could use uncertainty to do this, so that would be just like casting a spell and then having it casually break off a branch from the tree that you were hoping it would at some point, but like that's very inefficient. You could you could use scissors. That's how everyone would do it. But I was thinking of some sort of in between with this, which actually looks a lot like this. It's like a boomerang. And it's relevant to this. Not the safest thing, but which is why we're not going to do that one. This was just an example. So just cross that out. But these things let you create concepts of magic from which you can then generate uses from. But we'll use this concept as our base of magical manipulation. So that means that we're going to do weight manipulate sigil particles. Yeah. So these should have both purpose, which is done by the original sigil, and then made manifest by the kinds of magical tossing objects that we create. I don't know what any of these do. They're not really planned out yet. I don't know. These are just example ideas. But yeah. Okay. I made some inverse sigils, which I then translated into words that don't mean as much as the descriptions that I converted them from. So the first one will cross a certain distance before falling at an angle, so it'll go something like this, which, if you remember from the Oumuamua experiment thing, the square did that, while the tube like this did not. So like the square one sort of, the tube went like more like this. I don't know. We're trying to get something in appearance to this. The next one is to produce a wind effect, so it needs to propel the wind somehow, which means that it'll probably have to be shaped a certain way. The third is just this shape, and we're gonna make it so that each ball has a different mass to it, and the last one is pretty obvious. It's just very unpredictable, and those are the four objects we're going to create in the same sense as like what we discussed on this page with these things and weight manipulation sigils. So yeah. So I'm not using math or anything to design these. I'm just kind of guessing or trying to use my own thought process to design the four things. So they might not work perfectly or at all, but if they don't work, then I'll find some other property that they have that I didn't notice before, and thus they'll be different. But yeah, these are what we're going to use as our substances for the project. This is just like fluff. Found it outside once. around Halloween, I imagine. Which explains why it was there. That's polymer clay, and that's a candle. We're doing this one first. We're gonna throw it. Okay. And then I'm gonna try again. And again. I guess it does have an erratic bounce. That makes sense. Depending on what side it lands on, which varies based on how it's rotating, it bounces all over the place. On the carpet, at least, because of the fabric. So it did successfully be unpredictable, just not in the air. Although that's kind of hard to achieve. But, yeah. This one will probably have a higher chance of landing on this side. But it's really hard to tell. But it also rolls when it's thrown. Or it bounces on one side. I think the heavier side. I'm not sure because I can't see this fast enough. Might slow down the video to check that. Okay. And one more time. Alright. If you watch it in mid-flight, I guess you can on the camera, but it does go from this to this while falling. This one is supposed to produce wind, but I'm skeptical that it will. It's actually more erratic than the one we tried before. I don't know. If I throw it like this, I don't know. It spins a lot in the air. It seems to keep its if it's thrown like this, it stays like that. If it's thrown like this, it goes like that. Which is cool. I guess the best way to test that would be to just drop it straight down. But I think that actually changes how it falls. And then like this. Because it doesn't have one of the velocities. But, yeah. It might be easier to, I don't know. If I throw it like this, But if I drop it, it immediately wants to go that way. If I drop it like this, it moves. One is lighter because it's fabric and wax, so it'll go, I don't know, I guess it'll do pretty much the same thing. Not, I don't know, it's mostly just a normal ball that you throw. So this is a cup. If you rotate the cup, the liquid level stays relatively the same. It ripples a bit because of its own physics, but the liquid never actually reaches a higher level, unlike the cup around it. That's why liquids are good for manipulating the mass of something so that it's more likely to fall in a specific direction. I can't go further than what I just did because I don't have pumps or means of displacing liquid in a controlled manner, because by their own nature they stay at the same level. But if you had pumps, you could make the water rise or move around to desired positions and therefore control which direction the object will fall in, or at least move towards based off of its relative mass. So you could make it flip. I'm going to flip the cup, that would spill it all over the place. But you could flip the chair in midair by rotating the liquids inside of it. I don't know why you'd use a chair. Chairs are usually pretty stable, but it would allow for controlled rotation to some degree. It's not perfect, but remember the two balls attached to each other. They tended to rotate towards the heavier part and stay at that heavier part once there because it was stabler than the upper lighter ball, which was smaller. So, and it was a similar thing for the square one because it had a heavier portion. The only risk in it is that depending on which shape the object is, once it hits the ground, it will bounce. And depending on that shape, it bounces in a different way. And you could see that with the weirdly shaped one and the more complex shaped kind of cone triangle thing that I'm not sure what to call that shape. It has rules based off of its own relative shape, which are its basic mass positions, which then affect how you would move the water inside the object to then rotate it in a desired direction. So it's a bit more complicated than it looks, but I think it would be experimentation or finding some sort of equation, but I'm not sure. I'm bad at math, so I don't know how much further I can go in that direction. And for that reason, we're going to try to do something else with it. But at least I made those to show what you can do with it, and also the basic idea of something you could do with it. I still haven't found something I can do for now. Cool thing about this idea is that you can change the weight of an object by changing the state of the liquid inside. So it's already light because it's hollow, and then you fill it with a liquid, and then if it's cold, it becomes very heavy. But if it's heated up on the inside, it becomes lighter. So it becomes it's like turning on and off the weight of something, so something becomes heavier with it. And this, it sounds useful. It might be a little bit hot to touch when it's steaming hot, but like you'd be able to move chairs with cats on them a lot easier than if you just tried to lift that solid object. And this topic brought up another concept in my head that I thought of from a while ago, which I will probably focus on now instead, because I don't know how much further I can go with what I've been doing, just because I don't have any of the required technology to do it. I'm pretty sure you can. There are ways to change temperatures of objects, and there are ways to measure temperature and move a liquid around that exist, because my house would require both of those things to function. So I imagine it's possible to design something like that, and you might need a gyroscope like in your phone. But yeah, I think you could build that if you gathered the parts and designed it in such a way that it functioned. But I ain't got any of that stuff, so I can't. But we might as well explore other concepts related to this concept that I haven't actually discussed so much yet. So I'll be back. That's related to what I was talking about that I've thought of before, is that this object is very full, is probably the best way to describe it. It contains a completely filled shape. Like, it's wax all the way through, except for the string in the center. And thus it's more heavy. But not every object that we have access to is like that. For example, this cardboard, because she's made of cardboard, has holes in it, and that's just how cardboard works, like this. So she's lighter. She's still heavier than the candle, because it's smaller and takes up less space and is of a different matter. But yeah, that's messy. The point is that while this box is heavy, it's not actually the box that's heavy, it's what's inside the box that's heavy. So this tarot deck is like great for examples, apparently. But the box contains a huge set of cards, but without the cards in it, it's just a hollow box. It's still hard, I can knock on it, it's just not full. And that lessened weight of the hollow part of it makes for a lighter object, even though it still retains enough solidity to stay together. It's weaker, but it's more or less weighted. Natural objects are full. So it's easier to just gather a resource, use it, and then you're done. Because it works, but it takes up a lot more mass than it has to, simply because it's full of itself when it doesn't actually need to. And one sec. Computer, while really small, is still rather heavy. I don't know if you can tell its weight, but it's not. And its support is funky because it's open. But not everything in this computer is hollow. Like this part is probably hollow because it needs to contain the stuff inside. But you can decrease the weight of stuff by both shrinking it in size and in fullness. So making it spongy, while potentially changing the way the material works, actually decreases its weight. And on Earth, it's not overly useful unless you're doing something like making a new kind of substance that doesn't really work the same way. But for space travel, it's useful because you're decreasing the weight of the spaceship by hollowing out all the different parts. And I wouldn't say the outer shell of the spaceship, because that needs to be armored, but all the technology inside of it adds weight. So in hollowing out or lessening the inner part of the object, you actually make it lighter and therefore both more compact, because you have like a extra dimension of placement and extra lack of weight to use. So it actually makes it a lot easier for the fire at the bottom of the spaceship to propel it into the out of the atmosphere. And also it increases the speed by which it travels, simply because it's not as heavy, and that allows for more energy to push less stuff. So yeah, it's like a cup, because a cup is relatively light when it's empty, but you can put stuff into it and it'll get heavier, but it's only based off of how much is inside of it. So while making certain substances more frail, and like, I mean, tinfoil is kind of a bad example, but material can be quite strong, and when it's thinner, it's lighter. So you can decrease the amount of weight simply through that measure.